Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Fisher from Cascade Rail Foundation, and today is January 9th. That's right, January 9th, 2026. And we're back for our second program today. We did a brief presentation a few minutes ago with Alan Miller on the very little known rock trains of the Milwaukee Road and where they went and what they did. And again, another fascinating aspect of the Milwaukee Road that many people don't know about. So now we're going to be looking at a program that I'm sure everybody is just going to love, and it's going to be Alan Miller's program on train orders. Now, Alan is a train order collector. Alan was a telegrapher, and knows all this stuff. So this, friends, is going to be a great program. Sit back and enjoy it. And we'll have Dave Sprau, a train dispatcher, and George Foster. Um, it's January 8th today. Sorry, not January 9th. So I got that fixed, and I'm going to mute myself. And when I do that, then
Okay, my program today is on train orders and collecting train orders. And I've been collecting train orders since 1966 when I was 16 years old, and that's almost 60 years ago. And in fact, there's a club for people who collect train orders. And it's known as the International Association of Train Order Collectors. So we'll start out with a little history about train orders. Since they've been gone so long now, a lot of people have been born that never heard of train orders. But it's generally accepted that Charles Minot, who was the superintendent of the New York and Erie Railroad, invented the concept of train orders back on September 21st, 1851. He was a passenger on the train known as the Day Express, and they were stuck at Turner Station waiting for an opposing train. And before train orders, the trains just ran on timetable schedules. So when you showed up at your meeting point as in the schedule and the opposing train didn't show up, you waited and you waited and you waited until they finally showed up, because you had no authority to proceed beyond that point until you made that meet. And Charles Minot didn't feel like sitting around waiting for this train, not knowing even how late it was. So he went to the telegraph office there and sent an inquiry down to the next station and found out that the train hadn't arrived there yet. So he issued a message to the agent and operator there to hold that train. And then he wrote up a message for the engineer and conductor on the Day Express to go ahead and proceed to the next station. And they, in 1911, erected this monument to Charles Minot in what was now the town of Harriman, New York, commemorating that event. And from this station, Charles Minot, General Superintendent of the New York and Erie Railroad, 1851, issued the first train order transmitted by telegraph. And then this other shot will show the message here. And it was to the agent and operator at Goshen, and it read, "Hold the train for further orders." And then he made out a message to the conductor and engineer of the Day Express, "Run to Goshen regardless of opposing train." Now the engineer refused to do that, feeling that they were going to have a head-on collision for sure. So Superintendent Minot took the throttle and ran the train, and the engineer went and took a seat in the very back of the last car on the train, figuring that was the safest place to be for a collision. But the train made it to the other station with no problems. In fact, the other train was so late that he was able to move down a couple more stations by doing the same thing. And this plaque was stolen in later years. It was installed in 1911 to commemorate the event, and it was donated by Mrs. E.H. Harriman. And Harriman was the president of the Union Pacific Railroad and built that system up. And there is some talk of recreating this plaque because it was stolen and has never been recovered, but whether they'll ever get it replaced or not is up in the air. But we'll get into some train orders. And so this is my oldest train order. And if you know anything about train orders, this doesn't look much like a train order at all. But it's undated day in February of 1872. And this particular form is from a railroad called the Cleveland and Toledo Railroad. But they were absorbed by the Lake Shore Railway, and then on February 11th, 1869, the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern Railroad was formed from those companies, and so this is technically a Lake Shore and Michigan Southern train order on a Cleveland and Toledo Railroad form. And I call this type of train order form a receipt form, because to me it looks like the generic receipts that you would get if you pay your rent to your landlord. He would have a generic book like this to write up the receipt for you. But it is a kind of a question, train order in the form of a question. So it's addressed to EGW, who is probably either the superintendent or chief dispatcher or whatever that issues the train orders, and it's like a reply back to him. It says, I understand that I am to wait at Elmore until number 29 extra arrives. And then it says, is this right? And then if that is correct, then the conductor and engineer sign it and makes the order valid. And here we have an actual Lake Shore and Michigan Southern train order from 1879. And this was copied at a location called Wagon Works near Toledo, Ohio. And it's addressed to McKay, who would be the conductor. A lot of older train orders were addressed to conductors rather than the locomotives. And engineer, and it reads, run wild to Airline Junction regardless of wild trains. And then 12 means, do you understand? And then once they got their understanding of it, they gave it an okay, and the order was valid. Now, wild is a train that does not have a timetable schedule. And later those trains were called extras. And this is the third oldest order in my collection, February 18th, 1873. Pennsylvania and New York Railroad out of Towanda, Pennsylvania. And this railroad connected Towanda to Waverly, New York, and eventually became the Wyoming division of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. And this is on a rather large piece of heavy stock paper, so a separate order would have to be written up for the conductor and for the engineer, because they didn't have carbon paper wouldn't work on something like this. It's too heavy. I call it a certificate order because it's so big and heavy, you could frame it and hang it on the wall. But it's addressed to conductor and engineer, engine 162 at Towanda, which is also the dispatcher's office. So this is written up by the train dispatcher themselves. And it reads, run to Waverly Junction as extra train 48. Do not pass Milan until train 19 arrives. And then it's made correct 10:15 a.m. by Badger. And then they have the word operator crossed out and wrote dispatcher on there, as he was the one that issued it. And 31 means is telegraphic code for how do you understand, and then it's signed by the train master, who was had the authority to issue train orders on this railroad. And if you understand anything about train orders and extras, you're probably wondering, okay, engine 162, why is he being requested to run as extra train 48? Shouldn't he be extra 162? But the word extra did not mean the same thing in 1873. An extra train was a train that ran behind another train on their schedule and had the same rights as the train they were following. Now later those were called sections. And so if we use a section, then train 48 would have ran as first section 48, and then engine 162 would have been second train 48. But when they run them in these days, the extra was just train 48 ran as 48, and then this train ran as extra, or first extra 48, and then if they had more behind, it'd be second extra 48. And so anyway, they were just ways of running basically extra trains that they had to run, and they just tack them onto another train schedule. And not every railroad could afford to print up big fancy certificate train orders. This is the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, and this train order is doesn't have the year on it, but I've been assured that it was copied in 1878, September 6th, 1878, and it was copied at Lathrop, Missouri, and it's got a high number 835, which looks like they changed to 837. And that tells me that this railroad probably numbered their train orders monthly. And so, or maybe even every year, who knows, it's September 6th. But anyway, it's addressed to conductor and engineer number 2 at Kearney. NY is the call letters for the station of Kearney. And then this order was copied at Lathrop. So it also includes conductor and engineer number 3 at RA, which would be Lathrop. And it reads, number 3 runs to Kearney regardless of number 2. And then the 2 here means, do you understand? SSW was the superintendent's initials. And then it's signed by the engineer, McCammon, and whatever. And then made correct at 7:43 a.m. And then the operator's name was Service. And here's another one from the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, and this is Hamilton, Missouri, and July 7th, 1887. The dispatcher's office was in Brookfield, and it's to conductor and engineer number 9, and it reads Meet Green, and that would be the conductor's name, extra east at Kidder instead of Hamilton. And then again, the 2, do you understand? And then SEC was the superintendent. And then conductor Doan signed 3, I do understand, and then Doan And then this one was made okay by the superintendent at 11:20 a.m. And here the operator was named Pollock, right there, and then operator. Now, Hannibal and St. Joe did eventually get printed train orders, and that's because they were taken over by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. And so they just used CB&Q train order forms to replace the blank manifold paper they were using previously. And this one's out of Buckland, Missouri, October 7th, 1900, to conductor and engineer number 70. Number 5 and number 70 will meet at New Cambria. And here's another railroad that used blank manifold paper. But this was considered safe because they could use double-sided carbon paper and make all the train orders, make all copies from one writing. And that way the engineer and conductor both had exact copies of the train order as it was written from the train dispatcher. And so this is the Louisville, New Albany, and Chicago Railroad. And it's order number 5. The dispatching office was Monon, Indiana, April 19th, 1887, to conductor and engineer number 45. And RU was the telegraph call for Dyer, Indiana. And it reads extra north, engine 12, and then they spell out the word 12, will run from Fair Oaks to State Line, avoiding regular trains, but will meet extra south, engine 9, at Fair Oaks, and will run to Lowell regardless of train 45, and then 45 is spelled out, engine 49. And then again we have the 12, do you understand? And then this order is made correct at 8:38 a.m. And in April of 1887, the General Time Convention finalized a set of rules and regulations to govern all railroads in the United States, and it was called the Standard Code. And this is a 1940 edition because it was revised and upgraded over the years as things changed, but this was a code of rules and regulations that would govern all railroads so that things were the same from railroad to railroad. And so this was a big change to how train orders and stuff were issued. It's now train orders pretty much reflected and look the same from railroad to railroad. The format, like this 31 form here, this was a standard format for that. And again, now it's the Louisville, New Albany, and Chicago Railway again. And a few years later, this is 1890. And again, the dispatching office out of Monon. And copied at Dyer again to conductor and engineer number 41. Number 41. Now notice they've changed things. Now they spell out the number of the train first and then put the numerals behind it, which I think reads better. So number 4141, engine 62, can use 2 hours on the time of number 4 between Lowell and Dyer. And this was a cruder way of wording an order where you have right over a train. A modern one would say number 41 has right over number 4 between Lowell and Dyer, and then they would have like a 2-hour wait on number 4. And this is a little station at Dyer where all these train orders came out of. You had not only the Louisville, New Albany, and Chicago that we saw, but also the Chicago, Indianapolis, and Louisville, which is what that railroad became. And that was the Monon Railroad, and eventually they just became the Monon. And then also they found orders in here from the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railroad. So that attic in this little depot must have been stuffed full of old train orders. Must have been a pretty exciting find when they discovered them. And one of the early printers of train order forms was Rogers Manifold and Carbon Paper Company. And they were located on 75 Maiden Lane in New York. And the company was founded by H.D. Rogers and established in 1869. And not very long after that, carbon paper was developed, double-sided carbon paper that was used to copy train orders. And so Rogers pretty much dominated the early field of train orders. And this is a standard 31 form of theirs. That's a generic form. It has no railroad name on the form. But up here we can see Rogers Manifold and Carbon Paper Company, 75 Maiden Lane, New York, printed train order books. And then they even had a patent on it. And so Rogers was a big leader in train order printing in those early years. Now in the teens, another company, Rockwell Barnes Company out of Chicago, started printing train orders. And I don't know what happened to the Rogers company, but they seem to have disappeared out of the scene after a while. And for the rest of the time, it was pretty much Rockwell Barnes that dominated the train order printing trade right up until the end of train orders in the 1980s, late 80s. And the interesting thing is if you Google Rockwell Barnes on the internet, you can find very little information about the company. It was surprising. So back to train orders again. This is a Western Maryland train order from Emery Grove, Maryland, and it's dated July 21st, 1885. Notice how the word railroad is split into two words. And this order is they just wrote the code 31 on it, making a form that has to be signed. And the first order of the day, order number 1, and it reads, trains numbers 25 and 26 will meet at Glen Falls. Now, train orders were supposed to be brief and clear and not have any excess words that weren't absolutely necessary. So over the years, rules examiners trimmed the wording on a lot of these train orders. And so a simple meet order like this, they would later remove the word trains, remove the word and remove the word will. And so then an order like this would read, number 25, meet number 26 at Glen Falls. And then you might have noticed down here we have a rubber stamp with the word made and then a line that takes out the word correct. And so some rules examiner must have come to the conclusion that we shouldn't have the word correct printed on the form because that's supposed to make the train order valid. And so there was danger that somebody would just grab the train order and it hasn't been approved yet to go out, or some reason like that is my guess. So they had to handwrite the word correct on there with the time, and then the train dispatcher made it okay. Now, by coincidence, on eBay, I ended up getting a copy of the Western Maryland's rule book, and it's dated just the day before that train order, July 20th, 1885. And it does say in there that, to make the order valid, it has to have the word correct written on it. So that was kind of cool that I was able to get the train order and the rule book, because I suspect they were together in somebody's collection previously, and maybe through an estate sale or something they got separated, and I ended up getting them both back together again. Okay, this is the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, which then later on just became the Reading Railroad. But this is an example of their train orders from before the standard code was adopted. And this one's out of Philadelphia Dispatching Office, April 12th, 1886. And it's at Hellertown, Pennsylvania. And it's addressed to conductor and engineer number 72. And this is interesting. It says destroy former orders. In modern times, it would just say, orders such whatever numbers are annulled. But back then it was destroy your former orders, throw them in the firebox and burn them up. And it goes on to say, take sidetrack and do not run south of Hellertown until number 5 arrives there. Keep sharp lookout for repair trains close ahead. And so I don't know if repair trains was their terminology for work trains, or if there was some kind of a telegraph repair crew or something that was working out on the line. I can't find the phrase repair trains in their rule books. I have some very old rule books from this railroad, but they don't give a clue as to what repair trains are. And then sometimes you run into train orders like this that are quite old, quite interesting, quite crude. But this particular one here, now this isn't mine. I got this off of another site, and because if it was mine, it wouldn't be all wrinkled up. I iron my train orders, and you heard me right, iron. I use my wife's ironing board and her iron, and I iron out my train orders and make them nice and flat and crisp looking. But this is Chicago and West Michigan Railroad, or Railway, and again here we have rail and way split up into two words. And this is copied at Fremont, Michigan in 1886. But it's quite lengthy, it's written very small, hard to read. So train orders like that in my collection, I like to translate them into a more readable form. So here's the same train order. The dispatching office was out of Holland, Michigan. It's dated March 4th, 1886, to Thompson, conductor, and Tracy, engineer, of engine 43 at Fremont. And it reads, work tomorrow, March 5th, from 5:30 a.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. between Fremont Lake and 1 mile north of Fremont Wild. And so that means that he's not a scheduled train. Later, this would just be called a work extra. Look out for engine 24 Wild, which would be extra 24 north or whatever, running south, running south ahead of you, south of Fremont, after 7 o'clock a.m. Look out for engine 13 bound south, south of Fremont, and for engine 11 bound south. After 11 o'clock a.m., look out for engine 13 bound north to Fremont and returning south. After 1 o'clock p.m., look out for engine 11 bound north, and after 5 o'clock p.m., look out for engine 13 bound north to Fremont and returning south. And so I don't know what's with engines 11 and 13 making multiple trips back and forth, whether they're road switchers or maybe this is a helper district or something. And this is a old order off the Main Central Railroad. And excuse me. And they called theirs special train orders. And this one's out of the Portland, Maine Dispatching Office, February 15th, 1888, to conductor and engineer of a plow train at Vassalberg, Maine. Then it reads, "You will cross." Now, cross was an early word for meet. So you will meet number 23 at Riverside. And then 18 was telegraphic code for repeat this back immediately. And here's another one off the Main Central a few years later. This is 1894. And this is addressed to a special and at Mattawamkeag. And it reads, "Run Wild, Mattawamkeag to Vanceboro." And then we see the signatures for the conductor and engineers down here. And here's an oldie off the Michigan Central. And this order is copied at Orion, which is Lake Orion, Michigan, in 1905. And at this time, the Michigan Central was operating on the single order system. And this was the first method of train dispatching where each train would get an individual order sent to it instructing it what to do. And so in this case, you have two trains meeting, and each of these trains would receive a separate order written differently telling them to meet the opposing train. Most railroads adopted the double order system or the duplicate order system where train orders were issued in the same words to both trains. And so these two trains would receive the same worded order, which was a lot safer because there was a danger of issuing individual orders to individual trains that the dispatcher would make a mistake and get a wrong meeting point given to one train that differed from the other and could cause potentially a head-on collision. But this one reads, "Remain on sidetrack and meet extra engine 8272 at Orion." And then a dead giveaway of these single order system train orders was these code words down at the bottom here, code numbers. 2 was stood for telegraphic code for get answer immediately for, and then DSS would be the superintendent or the chief dispatcher or train master, whatever official was in charge of authorizing the train orders. And then the conductor's signature down here, you got a 3, and then the conductor's name was Rhodes. And the 3 is telegraphic code for repeat this name back so that the dispatcher knows that the conductor has understands it and signed for it. And then this line reads 9 and signature to same. And 9 means deliver immediately. And then the dispatcher's telling the operator to go ahead and deliver that order because it's now valid and in effect. And this is an interesting order. This is from the Ohio Southern Railroad at Summit, Ohio in 1889. And this was a predecessor railroad of the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton. And I grabbed this order because it had archaic phrases in it, several of them, all in one order. So it's out of the Springfield Dispatching Office on the 8th day of October, 1889. It's order number 12 to conductor and engineer, train number Costello. So there's one thing, they're using the conductor's name to identify the train at Summit, Ohio Station. and it reads Costello, and then they also use the engine number. Engine 22 will run wild. So there we got the wild archaic phrasing there. Summit to Jackson, and then flagging against Hill Train, engine 28, to gravel pit siding. And so flagging against would be, in modern wording, would be protecting against. And then regardless of would be replaced with has right over. But regardless of second, number 7, engine 20. And then it's signed, 12, you understand, and then Costello, the conductor, and then Snopes, looks like he was the engineer. And then it was made okay at, I guess that's 9:40 a.m. But, yeah, that's a interesting train order because it has so many archaic phrases in it. And speaking of archaic phrases, here's a Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western train order from 1889. And this uses the phrase wildcat. Now, wildcat was the original terminology for a non-scheduled train, and I believe the word wild was shortened from it. And so when you see train orders saying run wild, I think it was shortened from wildcat. I believe this terminology was earlier and much rarer. And I think it originated on the Erie Railroad. I've seen the term used in an 1864 Erie rulebook. But these are the only train orders I've ever seen that had the name Wildcat in it. Now, run wild, it would, train orders say run wild, A to Z or whatever. But when they use the term wildcat, it's a move within itself. It just says wildcat to Binghamton and back to Great Bend, not exceeding 15 miles per hour. And so this is addressed to conductor Scanlon and engineer Morrow. And then the WC for their train is Wildcat. And then it's out of Great Bend, Pennsylvania. And then down here we have 31. Answer how you understand, and then W.F. Halstead is the general manager, and then the train dispatcher's initials. And then if they understand it, they return back 32, I understand, and then that makes it correct at 2, whatever that is, 2:11 a.m., and then the operator's signature. And then here's another one on a little different form for the Buffalo Division, but addressed to the same crew, Scanlon and Morrow, on the same day, and to Wildcat, and I guess the engine 27 at Great Bend, and reads Wildcat from Binghamton to Elmira and back to Binghamton. But I have a train dispatcher's book from 1883 that also has a lot of train orders in there written to Wildcat. But these are the first actual train orders that I've been able to get my hands on that uses that very old term. And apparently they were using this term right up until 1901 when they adopted the standard code. And another old-time term in this train order, this is Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway. And this order is out of the Green Bay, Wisconsin Dispatcher's Office, November 26, 1906, to all concerned. And this is a train annulment order. And it reads number 71 of November 26th is abandoned between North Milwaukee and Green Bay shops. And modern train orders would use the word annulled, that this train number is annulled, and then it says bulletin here, so this train order was put up on the bulletin board for the crews to know that they didn't have to worry about this train on this day because it's not going to run. But the word abandoned kind of makes me chuckle because it gives me a mental picture of the crew just shutting down and leaving the train, and it's full of passengers, and you're out in the middle of nowhere wondering what's going to become of them because the train has now been abandoned. And this is an old train order from the Union Pacific Railroad. Now, the Union Pacific is a big, powerful railroad and has been around for a long time. They built the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, but you don't see very many old train orders from the Union Pacific, and I don't know why that is, but this is the oldest one I've ever seen, and it's out of the Council Bluffs, Iowa Dispatching Office, August 11th, 1888, and it's addressed to conductor and engineer, first and second, train 27, and copied at Omaha, Nebraska. And it reads, first section number 27 will carry signals from Omaha to Grand Island for second section. And then we got the 12, answer how you understand, and then 13, we understand this order as above written. And this is sections, like I said, run on the same schedule and have generally the same rights as the train they're following. And I don't have an old enough Union Pacific rule book to be able to tell you what color signals they're carrying. Normally it would be green signals to signify that there's a following section behind a train, but in these early days, a lot of times they carried red signals on the engine to indicate that they had another train following them. And then, of course, in these early days, this is before the Union Pacific adopted the standard code, and the order was made correct, where under the standard code, train orders are made complete. And then we have some kind of, I guess what you'd call famous railroads that we don't have any written train orders from, just blanks like this. And the Virginia and Truckee was storied in its own time, hauling silver bullion and coins from the mint and things like that, and train robberies and bandits and whatever. It'd be nice to have some written train orders from this railroad, but none have surfaced that I know of. The Virginia and Truckee Historical Society probably has a ton of them stuck away in boxes, but they haven't seen the light of day. But we see our old friend, the Rogers Patent American Manifold Writing Paper Company, copied these forms or printed them. But yeah, that's just one of many railroads that we don't have any written train orders for, and none of them seem to have survived. Now, this is another well-known railroad, the SP, or the Southern Pacific Railroad. And this is out of Mayfield, California, 1888. And it's addressed to the agent at Mayfield. FD is probably the telegraph call for Mayfield. Hold train 22, conductor Kenyon, engine 48 for orders. Now there's total train identification. They identify him by his number, 22, by the conductor's name, and by the engine number. So you got a 3-point identification there. The agent has no doubt that he's holding the right train. And then again, we have the 12, do you understand? And then they have a pre-printed 13 for the conductor's signature. And again, train order made correct. And then here's the Southern Pacific after adopting the standard code. And this is 1897. And this is I'm probably mispronouncing this station, but it's Beowawe, Nevada, and the dispatching office is out of Wadsworth, and it's dated October 26th, I think that is, 1897, and it's to conductor and engineer number 6. And here we have that 3-point identification thing again. Number 6, 6, Rocky, conductor, engine 1726, will run ahead of time, Beowawe to Battle Mountain, and will meet extra east, Asher, engine 1730 at Battle Mountain. Number 6 will take siding. Asher gets this order at Battle Mountain. And so in later years, a train running ahead of their schedule was almost unheard of, because that was a guarantee to everybody else out there working on the line that that train wasn't going to show up before it was scheduled to arrive there. But in the early days, that was, I guess, a generally accepted thing to run trains ahead of time if the line was clear. And then this last line here, to get where they say that he gets the order at Battle Mountain, which is the meeting point, lets the other train know that the train that he's opposing has no knowledge of their meet until he gets to the meeting point, so that they can approach that meeting point under control and prepare to stop in case the train isn't in the clear for him. And the Southern Pacific had a long history of using train order forms with no name, without their name on them, and that's one here. And this is again from our friends, the Rogers Manifold and Carbon Paper Company. Printed up these generic forms, and this is technically this is the Texas and New Orleans Railroad, but it's basically a subsidiary of the Southern Pacific to operate in Texas. In the early years, Texas had a law that you couldn't operate a railroad in the state unless that railroad was headquartered in Texas. So Southern Pacific and Santa Fe and the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas and other railroads had to create subsidiary roads and then put headquarters in the state of Texas in order to legally run their trains in the state. So that's what this order is about. And it's dated February 5th, 1903. It's copied at Echo, Texas. And it's addressed to a conductor and engineer of engine 613 and all east except first class. And then it reads, engine 613 will work extra until further notice between Echo and Vinton, protecting against all trains. And then we can see he had to protect against quite a few trains as the day wore on. And then this is a good example of a Southern Pacific train order with no name on it. And I think that they went to this form in the late 20s and used this blank type form clear into the 1970s before they ever finally put their name on the forms. And so a lot of Southern Pacific owned and controlled railroads also used these blanks because they didn't have any name on them. But this one here was issued on December 10th, 1941, and this was 3 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And it's out of Oakland, California, and concerns instructions during blackouts. And I'll just read a bit of it. It's rather long, but when air raid warning signals are given during darkness, all trains and engines must extinguish all lights, including hand lamps, headlights, cab lights, and lights in coaches and baggage cars And when engines provided with storm curtains, those curtains must be drawn to conceal light from the firebox. And then it goes on to tell them that they need to proceed to the nearest siding where they can get in the clear and then be in touch with the train dispatcher. And if they can't do that, they're supposed to look at nearby farms and towns and such and be guided by whether they have lights on or lights off to know when the blackout ends. So that's kind of a historic train order. And then keeping with our war theme here, we have a Northern Pacific train order from Everett, Washington, dated February 8th, 1942. And during the war, we went on a form of daylight savings time, where we set the clocks forward 1 hour to gain an extra hour of daylight, I guess, for getting things done for the war effort. But this reads, acceptance of this order is acknowledgement of receipt of instructions regarding change of time to be made at 2 a.m. February 9th, 1942. And then jump forward a few years, and on the Ann Arbor Railroad here, September 29th, 1945, we're now going off of what they called wartime. And this is out of Owasso, Michigan. And the first part of it reads, effective at 2 a.m. Sunday, September 30th, standard time will be retarded 1 hour in compliance with federal law, and all watches and clocks must be set back 1 hour so as to indicate 1 a.m., which will then become the new standard time. And so I have an order establishing wartime and an order ending the wartime. And then I have a number of train orders from the military railway service during World War II. And as the military liberated the various countries in Europe, the military railway service or railway operating battalions would come in and take over the railroads in those countries and get them back up and running again to use to transport troops and materials and supplies. And so this is an example of one of those train orders, and it's out of Mignano, Italy, and the dispatching office was Caserta, August 23rd, 1944. And it reads, after extra 2773 south and passenger extra 1650 south arrives Caserta, engine 2744, run extra Caserta to Rocca Seca and meet extra 3385 south at Tiano and extra 2066 south at Virano. And then I have another one here from Germany. This is actually the first military railway service train order that I obtained in my collection, and it was from a Milwaukee Road conductor named Jim Aragoni in Cleolum, and he just showed up at the depot one day when I was working there and came over and gave me this train order and a timetable with it. And he was in an railway operating battalion in Germany during World War II, and this is one of the train orders that he received at a station known as Winden. And it reads, after extra 2728 north arrives Landau, engine 44878, run extra Landau to Winden and meet extra 1811 north at Winden. Extra 1811 north gets this order at Winden. And so this is pretty cool. I was pretty proud to get this train order given to me. And then here's another one, and this is from Ukes, which is in Algeria, North Africa. And the dispatching office was out of Tebessa, March 4th, 1943, and this is during the Africa campaign. So this is Rommel, the Desert Fox, and General MacArthur battling it out. And it reads Motor 2, run extra Tebessa to Mbita, meet extra 9109 east at Ukes, and meet extra 864 east at La Mesquiana. Extra 9109 east gets this order at Ukes. And we also had railway operating battalions in India during the war. And so these are technically not train orders, they're line clearance orders. And line clearance was a form of dispatching trains that was developed by the British on rail lines that didn't have signals on them. And so this is the Bengal and Assam Railway, which only existed for about 5 years. And this one on the left is an upline clear ticket, and distinguished by being printed in red and having these red bars on the face of it. And it's from Pahartali Station. It's addressed to train 803 up. And that's what they used for directions, was up or down. And it's a goods train, which is a freight train, and it's authorized to run to Fonsterhat. And then I guess for security purposes during the war, they had a code word on these train orders, and this code word was Pearl. And I believe the 5 is a confirmation of how many letters are in the code word. And the one here on the right is a downline clear ticket, printed just in black on white paper. And it's addressed to a train down, and I'm thinking MV might be military vehicle special. And it's dated March 20th of 1945, copied at the station of Fakerhat, and it authorizes them to proceed to the station of Comilla. And then their private code word is duck with 4 letters. And then back here in the States, this is what is known as a schedule order. And this is on the Northern Pacific at Stadium, which was pretty close to McCarver Street in Tacoma. And it's addressed to C&E Westward third class and inferior trains, and then to conductor and engineer engines UP 3504 and 3208. And they're running on the joint track between Tacoma and Vancouver that was shared by the Northern Pacific, the Great Northern, and the Union Pacific. And this is a silk train. Now, silk trains were storied in their own times too, because they were moving raw silk that would come in on the ships to the Pacific Northwest, and that silk had to be transferred over to the East Coast, and it was a strict timing thing that they had to get that silk to the East Coast because it was basically cocoons. And at one point, the worm inside the cocoon was going to gnaw its way out to then become a butterfly or whatever, moth. And once it did that, those cocoons were worthless for making silk out of them, because they had to be basically unwrapped like a giant thread. And then silk was very popular in those days for everything from clothing to silk ties to silk stockings for women and whatever. So it was a high-priced industry, and so silk trains generally had rights over almost everything. So this one's engine UP 3504 runs silk extra, leaving Stadium on Wednesday, December 20th as follows, with right over all trains except first class. And then this is like a temporary timetable schedule for them. Shows what time they're going to be at every station all the way down to Vancouver, so that other trains receiving this order would know how far they can advance against this train and then be in the clear for them so they don't delay them. And this is the same type of order on the Santa Fe. And this is dated 1910, but this train order form is much earlier than that. And it's I can tell that because of the name up here, Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway Company coastlines, whereas in later it would just have a big word Santa Fe on here. But these were printed up specially for the Albuquerque Division, 1st District, eastbound, so there probably was a companion westbound with the stations in reverse order. And then it's listed as Signal 31 instead of Form 31. And it's out of Daly's, Nevada. And it has the schedule all here. And they have the station names pre-printed along with their telegraph call letters so that the operator only has to write in the times, which saves him a lot of writing. But this form is also so old that the station of Daly's was called Cortez back then, so he had to overwrite his station name on there when it came to it. But just another example of specialized forms in train orders. And then getting into kind of historical train orders here. This is Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul out of Marengo, Washington, and it's dated August 10th, 1923, to all concerned, and it reads, in memory of President Harding, which is President William Harding, or Warren Harding, I mean, entire operation of the railroad will be at a standstill between 12 noon and 12:05 p.m. today. All trains come to a stop for this period. And so this was in memorial to the president who was being buried on this day, his funeral. And he had gone up to Alaska on a trip up there about a month earlier, and he caught a cold up there and developed pneumonia, and he died from it. And then here's another memorial order, and this is for a former president of the Santa Fe. And this is February 7th, 1920, and issued out of Los Angeles to C&E All Trains, 2nd District. As a mark of respect to the memory of ex-President Ripley, all trains will come to a full stop at 12 noon and remain standing until 12:05 p.m. today, February 7th. And this Mr. Ripley was president of the Santa Fe Railroad and took it over at a time when they were in a deep scandal and had little respect. And he brought respect back to the Santa Fe and got it back to a good railroad again. And ironically, he had only retired like 30 days before he died. And here's one that's a kind of a famous memorial order. And this is November 25th, 1963. And New York Central Railroad, and it's copied at SR is Jersey Shore, which is Williamsport, Pennsylvania, to C&E Northward Trains. All trains and engines will stop at 12 noon, Monday, November 25th, 1963, and remain standing for 1 minute so that employees may observe a period of silent prayer for our late President John F. Kennedy. And then here's a rather historic one from the Union Pacific. And again, this is not in my collection, or it would be nicely ironed out. But Union Pacific, out of copied at North Platte, Nebraska, November 11th, 1921. And it reads, at 10 o'clock a.m. today, all trains come to a stop and remain standing until 2 a.m. or 10:02 a.m. and all employees cease activities, uncover, in other words, take your hat off, and face east during this time, which is the exact time the unknown soldier is being entombed at Washington, D.C., and this action is in his honor. And this order represents the oldest train order I've ever seen on the Southern Railway, and this was copied at Blockton, Alabama in 1900. And it's not particularly unusual in its wording. It just contains a run extra and a meet. But what it was is this and two other train orders from 1901 from the same station came up for bid on eBay, and they were like super cheap because you might remember a number of years ago there were the albums that were popular being sold in stores all over, and they had pages with these sticky stripes running diagonally across the pages, and then they had a clear plastic cover over it for photo albums. And people were buying them up like crazy and putting their photos in them, and they thought this was great for a while until after a few years this material started to break down, and in some cases it turned brown and came right through the photographs. And in other cases, it got so sticky that you couldn't get your photographs back out of the book without tearing them. And so anyway, this guy had 3 pages out of one of these albums with these Southern Railway train orders stuck in them, and he figured they were a lost cause, but he put them up for bid on eBay, and I ended up getting them super cheap. And then what I did is I used my wife's hair dryer or blow dryer and a real thin metal ruler, and I was able to liberate these 3 train orders out of the sticky trap they were in. And I think on this one I only lost this little chunk up there in the corner. The rest of this stuff was already crumbled away. And then of course the train order is doing a process called foxing, and that's nothing that you can do anything about. It's impurities in the paper making process due to water containing iron ore particles in it, and now they're basically turning red because it's a rusting process. But anyway, I was pretty proud of the fact that I was able to save these train orders. And then local railroads are popular to collect, and the Tacoma Eastern was a quite well-known railroad back in its time, and this is clear back in January 12th, 1905, so this is before the Milwaukee Road built their extension westward. So they're pretty much an independent railroad at this point, and they had the Tacoma Dispatcher's Office, and this order is to Engine 5 at Mineral. And it reads, Engine 5 will run extra Mineral to front. Now front, it would be the construction front, because they're now in 1905 was in the process of extending their railroad from Mineral towards Morton. And then it says, and return to Mineral. And then the chief dispatcher was NFB, which is Newton F. Bingham, and he was an early day dispatcher on the Tacoma Eastern, and then when the Milwaukee Road took over the T&E, he became a dispatcher on the Milwaukee out of Tacoma for a number of years until he retired. And here's another Milwaukee train order, and this is Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul. And this is out of the Malden, Washington train dispatcher's office on the Columbia Division. And May 28, 1913, to All West, and it's copied at St. Joe, Idaho. And it reads, trains will run very carefully and have one of the crew ride the pilot through the high water at Omega to see that the track is not washed out. So I love train orders that ask you to do a dangerous thing in the name of safety. And then again, the Milwaukee, in those days, using the telegraph code 12, do you understand? And then W.J. Jordan was the chief dispatcher out of Malden. And it's copied by operator Henry Smith. And it's signed 13, I understand, by conductor Thompson and engineer George Raitt on the Columbian train number 17. And about 3 years from now, George Raitt will be killed in a head-on collision between the eastbound and westbound Columbians. And then also signed by engineer or conductor Cummins and engineer Swift on train 15, which is the westbound Olympian. And foreign country train orders are also collectible. And this is Canadian Pacific Railway from Milverton, Ontario in 1907. And the Canadian railroads adopted the color pink for their Form 19 orders in the same way that the United States adopted the color green for Form 19 orders. And so almost every railroad in Canada had pink train orders at one point in their history. And this is addressed to Work Extra 1487. Number 91, Engine 811 will run 40 minutes late, Gulf Junction to Blythe. And so that allows the Work Extra to stay out there and work an extra 40 minutes before he has to get in the clear for this train. And then this is a companion order to it, and also out of Milverton. And in these early 31 forms on the Canadian railroads, they put the signature stuff up here on the top, which also served as the address. So it's to engine 1495, but then the conductor can sign his understanding of it up here, where later on a standard 31, all that signature information was carried down here on the bottom of the order. And this one is engine 1495 will run engine extra, which would be a light engine. Milverton to Gulf Junction, take siding and meet extra 1225 at Wallenstein. And another peculiarity that I've only seen on the Canadian Pacific on early 31 train orders is that they're numbered. This one's number 113. And so, like, is every page in the pad number 113, or is every page numbered differently? And then why? Since the train order is going to be numbered anyway from the train dispatchers, it doesn't seem to make sense. But like I say, it's the only railroad I've seen that did it. And another passion of mine is train orders from Mexico. And so this is the oldest Mexican train order that I've ever come across. And I had several other people that were train enthusiasts in Mexico that agree with me. This is out of the San Luis dispatching office, and it's October 2nd, I guess, 1900, and it's out of the station of Silea, and addressed to train number 12. Number 13 will get this order and meet number 12 at Kakalata. And the fact that it's written in English shows that the American and British forces that invested in these railroads was still very much in charge of them. In later years, they had to relinquish and get rid of the Yankees and let Mexicans work on these railroads and run them. But anyway, here's another. This is extremely rare. I got 2 train orders from this railroad, and this is the Kuahila and Pacific Railroad. This one's dated February 14th, 1903 at Paris in Kuahila, Mexico, to all trains. Run slow and careful on curve at kilometer 148, also around the wreck at San Isidro. And this railroad was so short-lived that there's hardly any photographs of it that exist, let alone any paperwork. So I feel real proud that I got a couple of orders from that railroad. And then this is a well-known Mexican railroad, the National Railways of Mexico. And this one's out of Puebla and copied at Metepec, in the state of Mexico, 1962. And this is a narrow gauge railroad, and to the extra 6331 south. And it reads engine 5864, take siding and meet extra 6331 south at Jaltepec, kilometer V90. And then Form 19 train orders on the National Railways of Mexico are extremely rare. I only have 5 in my whole collection. And this one's out of the dispatching offices of Acambaro to the extra 7501 south at Maclovio Herrera. And number 31 run 45 minutes late from Rio Hondo to Maclovio Herrera. And then train orders that have some history to them. This is Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway out of Cedar Falls, Washington. May 20th, 1928 to C&E number 17, which would be the westbound Columbian passenger train. And it reads passenger train handled by steam power between the East Switch at Van Asselt, which is in South Seattle, Georgetown area, and Union Station at Seattle. Leave motor and engine crew at Van Asselt to be picked up by number 17 on the return trip. And so they either hadn't finished stringing overhead trolley into the Union Station yet, or it was out of service for some reason. And this is another order unique to an electrified railroad, and this is also out of Cedar Falls, January 4th, 1928, to all eastward trains. And it reads trolley okay and hot from West Switch Bandera eastward. So they had the trolley de-energized for repair work or something probably, and they're now notifying that the trolley is up and running and hot. And here's an unusual order. This is Milwaukee Road from Marengo, Washington again. And nothing unusual in the order itself. Number 263 has left Marengo. But when you look up at the number, it's number 41 1/2. And there were a couple of reasons for that. One is that the the dispatcher realized that he had issued orders in the wrong order. There's a certain procedure that you have to put certain orders out ahead of other orders in order to prevent a rules violation. And so if he had another order 41 out, if he wanted to annul that and redo it, he'd have to annul both Form 41s. So he alleviated that by adding the number 1/2 to this 41, and then it can stand alone. But it's bad practice and shows that the dispatcher wasn't paying attention to his work close enough. And then the other reason for putting a 1/2 on the order is that they again duplicated an order somehow in the book and missed it and had to add a 1/2 rather than try to annul it and put it back right again. And then every once in a while, a nice historic train order will land right in your lap. And I was gifted this train order by a nice lady who's it belonged to her grandfather, and he was a early day engineer on the Milwaukee Road that came over to the Western Extension when they were constructing it and went to work on the railroad on the west end and the Trans-Missouri Division, and what then became the Muscle Shell Division. And so he had saved this train order, and what makes it unique is it's dated November 26, 1908. So this is before the Milwaukee Road extension had gone into service yet. It was still under construction. And once it went into service, then it became the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound Railroad. But here it's technically the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway Company of Montana, which was one of 4 construction railroads that were created for the building of the line. And so this order was issued out of the dispatching office at Marmarth, North Dakota, and addressed to conductor N.H. Fuller, and E would be engineer. And it's copied at Ismay, Montana. And the operator anticipated that he was going to put out a running order, so he wrote the word run. But then the dispatcher surprised him and made it a work extra. So it said work extra between Ismay and Mildred until 7 p.m. Thursday, November 26th. After 2 p.m., keep out of the way of Stock Extra East, Chamberlain conductor, and Extra West, Simpkins conductor. And then we got the 12 and then the 13, I understand. And then Engineer Masterson was the man who saved this train order. And it's interesting down here, they also put, I understand, Thanksgiving Day, 1908, Tom and Jerry and Champagne Punch. And so that's probably why he saved this train order, because he had to work on Thanksgiving Day that year. But it's a nice train order to have, and as far as I know, this is the oldest train order on the western extension of the Milwaukee Road. And Rule 201 says train orders are supposed to be brief and clear in as few words as possible. So this is a blatant violation of Rule 201. This is on the Great Northern out of Delta Junction, which is a drawbridge on the north end of Everett. And they're putting in CTC between there and Seattle, and so this is a long, drawn-out order telling you where every signal is and the hand lock switches and blah, 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 blah. But I feel sorry for the night operators because this order was in effect. It was put out March 10th and it wasn't annulled until March 13th, so it was up for 3 days. So the night operators probably had to recopy this to make more copies to hand out to the many trains going by there. And boy, that would be a hard one to recopy without making an error in it somewhere. And here's a Great Northern version of the schedule orders, what they call their 19 schedule. And this is out of Lowell, Washington, which is a suburb of Everett. But it mentions the engine 5018, which was one of the big W class electric locomotives that the Great Northern had, and their line was electrified between Skykomish and Wenatchee. And so this is a train leaving Wenatchee, and the Great Northern had, in their train order rules, you had to spell out the time as well as write it. So this was quite a bit of writing for the operators to copy these orders. Now, how did they get train orders to the trains? Well, they used hoops after when the 31 train orders, the trains had to stop. The conductor had to come into the telegraph office, read the train order, understand it, and then sign it for himself and the engineer, and then go deliver a copy to the engineer and have him read it back to him so that he knew that he understood what it was. And then if their orders were in order, they could proceed. But when the Form 19 train order came out, then you could hand orders up to moving trains. And so this is the early way they did it. They used these rattan or bamboo hoops that were in the shape of a numeral 9. And when the engineer sticks his arm through that hoop, then the operator lets go of his end of it. And then the engineer would usually pull the orders out of the clip real quick and then throw the hoop down onto the right-of-way. And then the operator or the agent had to walk down the tracks and retrieve them. And here we see a conductor with a bamboo hoop on the back of the caboose here. And sometimes if it was a local freight that was making a round trip, they would keep the hoops and they'd stick them over the brake handle here on the back of the caboose. And then when they made the return trip, they'd throw hoops off at the stations that they got orders from to return those hoops. And then in the 1930s, a better way was invented by a guy, invented these delivery forks. And his company was called the High Speed Delivery Fork Company. And it was basically a hoop refined in the shape of a Y, and then you used a string, and the string had a double slip knot on it so that you could put the orders in there and then cinch the knots up, and it would hold the orders inside the string. And then the string was strung across the notches in the top of the Y there, and then they had a retention spring down here that you'd put the string into that would hold it in place, and formed a triangle out of the string, and then you just stick your arm through the triangle and the string would pop off of the hoop, and you'd have the orders and leave the hoop behind. And these could be handheld and handed up by hand, or you could put them in a rack like this, and now the engineer's grabbing the top set of orders here, and then the bottom lower set there would be for the conductor on the caboose or somebody in the baggage car if it was a passenger train. Now, how did trains know they were supposed to pick up train orders? Well, that's where the train order signal comes into play. This is one of the earliest signals that was known as a Swift type signal. And when this red target was parallel with the railroad tracks and the building, then it was a clear signal, and this lantern would show a white light or a green light to show that there was no orders. But when it was displayed like this at a right angle to the tracks, then it was a stop in both directions, and then the lantern usually had a red lens in it so that they could see it at night. And the Swift order board came in different shapes. This is a more squared off version of it. And the Northern Pacific had a very unique style that they called the Ames banner type signal, but it to me it reminds me of a big key that you use to wind up an old-time clock. But to make a 19 board out of this, where you could hand the orders up on the fly, you would display a yellow flag or a yellow lantern at night underneath this signal, and then that turned it into a 19 signal. And then the other type of signal commonly used was a semaphore signal, and when the blade was horizontal like this, that was indication you had to stop for orders there that had to be signed for, or some reason they were restricting at this point, and you had to know that before you proceeded beyond the station. The one on the other side is at a 45-degree angle, and that was a 19 indication that you could pick up the orders on the fly. And then if the arms were straight up, that was clear, no orders. And train orders were so well known back in the day that they used them in advertising and all kinds of other things. Here we see an ad for the Elgin Watch Company and a set of Pennsylvania lines west of Pittsburgh. Train order, 31 form train order in his hand, and it says the Elgin Watch and the train order make travel safe. And even books that spoke of orders. This is a book called Held for Orders, Tales of Railroad Life. And Frank Spearman was quite a proficient author of railroad subjects. He never worked for a railroad, but he worked around railroaders and picked up a lot of stories. And this book even has a section on about dispatchers, and actually has some train order examples in it. And train orders were sometimes unique to a particular railroad. The Northern Pacific had this style of order that was basically a register check, and dispatchers called it a rain barrel order because I guess the most common place to leave it for the next train was on the rain barrel with a rock on it to keep it from blowing away or whatever. This is the Northern Pacific Depot in Everett in 1958, and reads, at Bromart, conductor of extra detector car B102 West will leave a copy of this order with engine number, time of arrival, and date with his signature written on it as evidence of the arrival of his train at Bromart for the extra 329 East. And this would let the opposing train know that the train he had restrictions against had now departed, and he was okay to proceed on. And then Milwaukee Road in the 1960s used to issue these holiday orders for various national holidays. And this one's out at Tacoma Junction, 1964, on Memorial Weekend. And it reads, account dense automobile traffic expected and movement on all streets and highways. Take additional precaution in sounding whistle signals approaching crossings, and see there is no failure to protect switch movements over all crossings so that we may assist in saving lives and avoiding injuries and damage to property. And then we get into the art of dispatching. And in this, this is a nickel plate. The New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad was also known as the Nickel Plate Road, because when it was bought, it was purchased at one point um, by a prominent guy that's escaped my memory right now. But anyway, he paid so much for it that the newspapers said that the railroad must have been nickel plated to be worth that much, and that stuck, and so they adopted that as their alternate name. But anyway, this was a railroad that bucked the system. Instead of adopting the 31 form train order, they adopted what they called their 19 form train order, but it required signatures like the 31 form did. But the main point of this order is it's what I call a combination order. Dispatchers were allowed to combine certain train orders rather than issue, in this case, he would have to issue 5 different orders to accomplish the same thing. And some dispatchers were talented enough that they could combine those 5 orders into one long order. And so this one here is addressed to 4 trains. It's out of Wallace Junction, Pennsylvania, to conductor and engineers of number 29, and then 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, train number 44. And basically it contains a Form G train order for engine 104 to run extra from Fairview Pit to Connow, and then it contains a Form A for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, number 44, and then their engine numbers, and the extra West engine 104 to meet at Girard. And then it contains another Form E, or a Form E, for a wait, to wait at Creighton until 4:40 p.m. and a wait at Springfield until 4:50 p.m. for number 29 and the extra West engine 104. And then it's got another Form E for waits at Creighton until 5:30 p.m. and the wait at Springfield until 5:45 for the trains. And then it has finishes up with another Form A for a meet. Engine 104 will meet at Connow. And so that's 5 different forms involving 9 trains. And it's within the parameters of the rules because each movement directly affects the first train named, which is the engine 104. He's mentioned in every one of these 5 different moves. So I consider this a work of art by a dispatcher. And later, when the Form 19 train order came into vogue, the Nickel Plate Road already had a Form 19 they were using, so they developed this Form 17 to accomplish the same purpose. These orders could be handed up to trains on the fly, and they developed this about 1916. This form came into use, and it could be delivered without taking signatures, and but it was couldn't be used to restrict the rights of any train, but it was later modified to allow the Form 17 to be used to restrict freight trains on double track and on single track automatic block system lines, except at meeting points. And then not very long after this was copied, in late 1943, they adopted a new book of rules, and under that they adopted the traditional Form 19 order and the Form 31 train order. And this is a really old order from the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad from the Central Ohio Division of the B&O, and it's dated December 7th, 1877, out of the dispatching office of Newark, and it was copied at Spencer's, Ohio, and reads meet number 14 extra at, and I can't really make that out, is Shattuck or something maybe, carry white signals, Burton's to Bel Air. And so white signals could mean a following section, or in those early days too, that sometimes the trains would carry white signals to indicate that an extra train was following them. And that's where the tradition came that later on the extra trains would fly white signals or white flags. Came from that early tradition of displaying white signals for a following extra. And this is another Baltimore and Ohio early train order from 1888 from Monroeville, Ohio. And it reads number 25, engine 981 and Wild East, engine 246, will meet at Perkins. Number 31, engine 603 and Wild East, engine 246, will meet at Prince, I guess. But anyway, that's a crude train order from the B&O before they adopted the standard code. And then we have train orders that have unusual combinations of names. This is from the Cedar Rapids and Iowa City Railway, and it's copied at Crandick, Iowa. And Crandick was a name formed from the letters of the railroad, the CR, Cedar Rapids, and Iowa City, IC. So they formed this word Crandick as an acronym. And engine 91, run extra, Crandick to Iowa City yards. And then here's another acronym here on the Illinois Central. This is from a tower named CIMIC, and that stands for Chicago and Illinois Midland and Illinois Central. There are two railroads that crossed here at this point. And it's addressed to the Chicago and Illinois Midland, engine 701, run extra CIMIC to East Grand Avenue at 12:30 p.m. All overdue trains except number 65 have passed CIMIC. And then sometimes you get historic train orders for special things that happened. This is October 30th, 1975, and this is a train order out of Everett, Washington, on the Burlington Northern, addressed to the engine American Freedom Train 4449. It was using the Southern Pacific engine, and it was touring across the country, and it was coming into Seattle at this time. And so I knew the operator, Kenny Helpney, that was working at the Everett passenger station at that time, and so I called him on the phone and asked him if he copied any orders for the Freedom Train, if he'd make an extra set for me, which he did. And so when the train showed up in Everett, I went down there and went in the office and picked up my souvenir train order. And the string ran out in the late 1980s after 170 years of operating trains by train orders. The technology finally caught up with it was replaced by track warrant uh, control TWC or DTC direct traffic control systems uh, that replaced train orders. And so this is the last train order copied on the Burlington Northern in the United States. I think for a little while they still put out train orders up in Canada until that system went down. But anyway, January 16th, 1988, from Tacoma to a Union Pacific engine to run extra from Nelson Bennett to beginning of CTC at Wabash, which is down by Centralia. And so this was the last train order issued on the Burlington Northern and brought that system of running trains to a close. And so this also brings my program to a close. So I hope that you found it of some interest and maybe learned a few things. And I appreciate you watching it. Thank you very much.
Well, that was quite a program, Alan. That was just fascinating. So, the first thing I need to do is take a look at what's been going on in the chat because we've gotten quite a bit of chat. First, Dave Sprau corrected me. Today is January 8th, not January 9th. And I made a note to correct that. So I got that. Um, and I'm just looking through. I mean, and while Dave has been adding all this stuff to the chat, I've been sitting here writing down notes about all these different things that were just so, um, these things were just so interesting. If you guys click, Alan, do you know how to click on the chat down at the bottom of your screen?
I know where it's at.
Yeah, why don't we
I've
just take
never
a
actually
look at
done
um what we've
That
got here. Yeah. So Dave's got a comment about BOWAWay, and that's what I've always heard it called as too. And that was in 1897. So that was before the WP was built. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Um,
it. Yeah, I messed up on that military railway order from North Africa. I said MacArthur, and that should have been George Patton was the
yeah, we'll all live
guy
with
that
that.
went toe to toe with Rommel.
So we've got 251 George and Dave violates the old schedule. Trains will not leave their station ahead of time, paraphrase, and I forget what one we're looking at. And then Dave was chimed in with Rule 92. So what was that about, guys?
just
Oh,
couldn't do it.
yeah, they can't do it. They had to issue a train order that tell them to leave ahead of time. Otherwise, even if they're ahead of time when they are at the last station before they move again,
Hmm.
they cannot leave ahead of the posted or the scheduled time of their departure there. So the guy could make up all the time he wants, but when he gets to the next station, he can't leave before the scheduled time. So all that running helps those people that get off at that station get there sooner. But after that, you still got to wait.
Yeah,
And
Oh,
that's
and the
definitely for safety.
normal procedure to run a train ahead of schedule like that Southern Pacific train order from 1897 would be to annul their schedule and run them as an extra.
That's right.
So, and I was reading Dave's comment from 3:19 p.m. In Mexico, an operator, dispatcher, or trainman guilty of a wreck due to mishandling of orders was subject to the death penalty.
Oops.
I,
true story. They just haul you out and shoot you.
Summary execution. Yeah, I've got like Alan had. I've got a train order off one of the Mexican railways. I don't remember which one it is, but also what was interesting in the heading of that one said ferro, which is iron, carril,
Hmm,
which is railway,
right.
but they were separate words on that. But then when you look at if you look at um, Spanish lettering on Mexican freight cars, they combined ferro and carril as one word. ferrocarril.
Right. Just like
And
we
then
had rail and way and rail and road, and they finally combined
that's
it into
exactly
one
right.
word.
And then also uh, in Spanish, the plural of train or is trenes or trenes, and and this and that. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. If you know a little bit of Spanish, it helps, but you can figure it out. And
Yeah, if
then
you
also
look
the
long enough, you
bilingual
can kind of
orders,
figure out what the English word might be. So,
also the bilingual addresses, like it had the Spanish word for conductor and then it had the English word for conductor, so depending on, I guess, what your language was, then you would sign in the appropriate spots, you know. Uh, One other thing I'd like to ask for Alan, I was especially interested in, and Jonathan would laugh at this. I was especially interested in that train order that specified the station of Stadium, and you're probably correct. It's McCarver Street, but I was wondering if I could have you shoot me an email with just the image of that, so I could just put it in my collection because I want to create a montage of stadium stuff, and it would be interesting to have that in there.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank
aren't
you.
is a Stadium High School, aren't they the Tigers?
Yes,
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I had a
El
Tiger
Tigre.
shake
That's right.
across the street there. So Dave, who is EWJ?
Earl W. Johnson. Hey, Stadium was close to McCarver Street, but they're not quite the same.
Yeah,
Stadium
that's
was
right.
Was sta
Stadium was the end of a tin tunnel that was
The Tin
erected.
Tunnel? Yes, yes, the Tin Tunnel. So,
Yeah, Stadium was right overhead of the Sperry Flour Mill.
Yeah,
right,
close to
right.
McCarver, close to
Yeah,
No Cigar.
yeah, yep. No,
Um, I want to state that I could not have done as well as Alan did with this program. I thought it was just excellent, and none of my comments are meant to disparage that in any way. They're just furnished as additional information.
Oh, absolutely, Dave. But I mean, but they add some nuance to it for people that, like me, that aren't as quite as savvy about this kind of stuff as you are. So the train order 41 and a half, of course. So I'll let Dave talk about that in a second. But Alan, Marengo, wasn't that a UP depot? Wouldn't that be a UP order?
No, it was a joint station because that's where the passenger trains coming out of Spokane would get back onto the Milwaukee
Get
rails
back
there.
onto the Milwaukee Road, right? But so they
So
would
they
write,
had the depot was between the two lines, and they had
right?
two separate train order signals. They had a lower quadrant semaphore for the UP, and then they had an upper quadrant semaphore on the other side of the building for the Milwaukee.
Okay, so depending on what railroad it was for, dictated what train order form it would be on.
Right. And
and
Okay,
depending on which dispatcher rang you up.
you also had to remember that what was that to number 17 or 15? I can't remember which.
the
Oh,
41 and a half, 17 ordinarily not care about lower
Oh,
class
I mean
number
the train itself,
263.
the Milwaukee train that it talked about on that
Yeah,
other
that was
order.
17, and Dave's comment was 17 would not ordinarily care about a lower class train like 263. The dispatcher must have issued a run ahead order, and then that's why this came up. Does that
Yeah,
make sense to you guys?
yeah.
yeah.
So, Dave's got a lot to talk about. I just want to squeeze in a couple things. First and foremost, the term wild trains will mean something different to me from now to the end of my days. I mean, it's like wild trains. I know what those are now.
I've
Yeah,
never
when
even
I
heard of
when I
that.
see the term wild on a train order, it gives me an impression of a engineer hooping it up and pushing his tea kettle for all she's worth. And
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
we
yeah, it
never
just
did
has
that.
it's an interesting description. So then Dave, when you started out, they were doing train orders out on the Aberdeen Hoquiam line on the Northern Pacific, right?
Oh yeah, it was still yes, it was still when I started out, everything was still train orders on the NP. There was no CTC except in the Stampede Tunnel.
And then it was still Morse code out to the coast too, wasn't it?
Yeah, and on the Sumas line and most of the branch lines were still
So then
Morse.
did you use these like 2 and 3 codes or 12 and 13 codes and stuff like that? Were those still around by your time?
No, that had been eliminated from the train order forms in the rule book that was in effect by the time I came to work. Alan, what would you say? I think the discontinuance of that 12 and 13 stuff was not too long after the turn of the century. Would you agree?
Yeah, the Milwaukee perpetuated it until 1917 when they finally adopted the standard code, and they were probably one of the last ones to use that.
A couple other things that I noticed that were of particular interest to me. Um, First, of course, Owasso, Michigan. You had a train order from Owasso, Michigan. And that is the home of Pierre Marquette 1225 that goes on its annual tours, is based in
Wow.
Owasso. And I've ridden that train. It was really cool. And Mr. Aragoni being the conductor on the Milwaukee Road at Clay Elum, we've seen his name in some of our other programs too, haven't we? We have. So,
Yeah, he
um,
just showed up over at the depot there one day when I was on duty and gave me that train order and then a two-page timetable for the section of line that he was working on from Ludwigshafen to Winden. And,
wow. So he just it saved the stuff from after the war and decided to use
yeah,
it,
I wish now I would have went over to his house after work and
cleaned him out.
sat down and talked with him about his experiences over there, but I didn't. I was too ignorant. I didn't even know anything about the railway operating battalions until he gave me that train order.
I
Yeah.
I worked with an engineer on the UP that was his name was Skip Mason, and he had a 73 engineer's date, but he said that when he was in the Army, he worked on probably the last railway operating battalion at Fort Eustis, Virginia, which is where the transportation school was. And I think it was the 714th Railway Operating Battalion. So
So
that was pretty interesting to me.
the train order from October 30th, 1975 with the 4449, we know who the fireman was when it went through Everett, don't we?
Yes, we do.
That would be Jack Christensen.
That's right.
Yeah, we were just talking to Jack about it, and he said he got to fire it west of Skykomish. So Jack would have been on that train. Um, another one, I can't I generally stay clear of conspiracy theories, but the cause of death of Warren Harding has never been established. There was no autopsy, and and his wife died shortly thereafter. So there has been a persistent rumor in history, because I've studied Harding quite a bit because he went for the gold spike in Alaska, and of course that was of interest to me. There is a persistent rumor that he was murdered. So,
Oh,
I've read
yeah.
a little bit about that too.
Yeah, and his wife was the last person to see him, and then he was suddenly dead, and then they did no autopsy. And and then she died shortly thereafter.
Did they cremate him or did
I
they
believe
just,
they did.
well, there you go.
So,
That's
and of
going to get
course,
rid of it all.
the alternative rumor about Harding that had been out there for many years is he said that he couldn't make children. And so these people that were out there asserting that they were children of Warren Harding were obvious liars. And of course, through the using DNA technology, we established that those people really were the descendants of the president
Whoops.
from some time prior to him becoming president. And then the
well,
last one, of course, what's
little
that?
over a month before he died, he came west over the Milwaukee and actually operated a quill locomotive over the Bitterroot Mountains to Avery, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too. Yeah, he came over on the Milwaukee in the business car, the Superb, and yeah, they let him drive it, and then
from
got back to
Sappington.
Seattle, collapsed on stage at the University of Washington uh, field, the football field, and then went to San Francisco and then Paris shortly thereafter. So another place that you mentioned was Dyer, Indiana, which is like right near my where my aunt used to live, right on the Illinois-Indiana line, and that was the former Monon. And the Monon was gone. It merged into L&N in 1971. So it was gone before I got to Illinois with the camera for the first time in 1975. And so, but the tracks stayed in place, even though that they had diverted the Monon trains onto the L&N, which was using C&EI trackage rights at the Yard Center. The tracks were still there. And in the last couple years, in fact, last time I was there about 2 years ago, they were just finishing the depot in Hammond, Indiana, and they revitalized all that track and ran it like, I guess, 10 to 12 miles south of Hammond, where they used to intersect, which I think is where Fair Oaks was, and that's now turned into a commuter line. So the Monon lives on. There you go. This was a great program. The other note I made was the Fort Worth and Denver would be another railroad that would have to have a Texas address, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was just a really,
I think what they did was that they used the Colorado and Southern as far as they could, and then it had to be connected with the FW&D because that was all subsidiary stuff all the way to Houston.
yeah,
And
exactly.
those were that was the Burlington in Houston, and
Right.
but not the Burlington Railroad per se.
Interesting program. Both programs today were quite good. I mean, the rock trains is rare and valuable
Yeah, it
stuff
was.
that no one knows anything about. But this is was just a lot of information to absorb in a short period of time. So we're going to wrap up here in a second. Dave, you got anything more before I let you go?
No, I have nothing to say. Very
That's
good program. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah,
Fun.
Alan, this was so much fun. Yeah, we need to do this kind of stuff again. So at that point, I am going to move us to adjournment. We've been at this now for about 3 hours this afternoon on January. I'm reminded today is January 8th, 2026. I'm Jonathan Fisher from Cascade Rail Foundation with my friends George Foster, Dave Sprau, and our special presenter today, my dear friend Alan Miller. And I want to thank everybody now and in the future for watching this program. And on that happy note, I'm going to say bye for now.